It began with a leak. A low-volume message whispered across a secure inbox. A claim that alcohol had been discovered near Diddy's living area inside the prison. Not confirmed, not verified, but alarming enough to make the corridors inside Fort Dix tremble with tension. According to insiders, the report didn't arrive with sirens or alarms. It arrived with a quiet urgency. A message passed from one officer to another in clipped, cautious tones. "Check the West Unit again," one officer allegedly said. "There's something off, something they want documented." And that was all it took to ignite the spiral that followed. As dawn crept across the compound, officers began moving differently. Their steps grew sharper, their eyes more focused, their voices tighter. The stillness of the early morning was broken by the echo of boots traveling down the long concrete hallway leading toward the unit where Diddy is held. Inmates felt the shift instantly. They leaned from their bunks, craning to see what was happening, whispering theories through the metal bars. What did they find? Someone muttered, "Is it true?" Another asked, voice tense. No one knew the details. No one had seen anything. But rumors move faster than truth in prison, and within minutes, the entire block was buzzing with the same phrase. Something was found near Diddy, outside the cell areas. Inside the administrative wing, the atmosphere grew heavier. Reports claim a correctional supervisor walked into the security office with a folder tucked under his arm. Face pale, lips pressed tight as if holding back something explosive. Officers gathered around him, waiting for instructions. He allegedly placed the file on the table with a soft but chilling thud. "This came from an anonymous source," he said quietly. "It suggests alcohol may have been discovered during night rounds. We don't have confirmation yet, but we need to act like we do." And with that single sentence, the unit camera screens were switched on one after another, flickering awake like the eyes of some mechanical giant preparing to judge what it would see next inside Diddy's unit. Things were far from calm. Reports suggest officers began conducting walkthroughs with unusual urgency, checking corners, scanning shadows, looking under bunks, inspecting areas that were typically ignored during standard morning sweeps. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the air thick with suspicion. Inmates stood against their walls, hands behind their backs, exchanging nervous glances. Diddy, according to a person familiar with the situation, remained still on the edge of his bunk, head lowered as the officer's footsteps drew closer. He didn't talk. He didn't move. He simply waited, eyes locked on the small cracks in the concrete floor beneath his feet, as if searching for an escape within them. The alleged leak claimed alcohol had been discovered near his area, not under his pillow, not in his hands, not proven to belong to him, only that it had allegedly been found in proximity. A vague claim, a dangerous claim, the kind of claim that could still trigger internal panic simply because of who his name is, because anything connected to him becomes bigger, louder, and more complicated than it would be for any other inmate. According to insiders, officers didn't want to act aggressively until they knew more. But they also couldn't afford to ignore the possibility. So they moved carefully, scanning Diddy's space, searching the communal areas near his bunk, checking the trash bins, the shelves, the railings. Anything that could hold a container. What happened next remains unclear. But one guard reportedly stepped away from the group, lowering his radio as he examined a corner near the lower tier. He crouched down, leaned closer, and then paused a long, tense pause that rippled through the entire unit like an invisible ripple. Another officer stepped forward. "What is it?" he whispered. The guard didn't respond immediately. He simply lifted his hand, and though it was not confirmed what he held, sources claim it was something small, something metallic, something that could be interpreted, at least from a distance, as contraband. But no one has officially confirmed this. No prison spokesperson has issued a statement. No official report has been filed publicly. The only truth so far is the leak, anonymous, unverified, but explosive enough to make the federal system shift. For Diddy, the atmosphere around him allegedly tightened like a closing fist. Officers approached him carefully, methodically, their tone professional but firm. "Stand up," one reportedly said. "Step to the side." He complied, slow, controlled, his breathing shallow, his hands trembling ever so slightly. Not from guilt, no one knows the truth yet, but from the weight of being under scrutiny again. The fear that a single object found anywhere near him could instantly trigger consequences far greater than the rest of the unit would ever face. He didn't speak. He didn't protest. He didn't ask what they found. He simply watched the officers move like ghosts through his living space, checking every inch with clinical precision. Moments later, according to one insider, an officer whispered into his radio, "We need confirmation from the warden." That sentence hit the block like a silent explosion. Because once a warden is notified, everything changes. That means the situation is no longer casual. It's no longer routine. It becomes official, documented, and potentially catastrophic. Inmates exchanged looks, some shaking their heads, others raising their eyebrows, all wondering the same thing: how could this be happening again? And even though nothing had been confirmed yet, the tension in the air made it feel as though the entire unit was holding its breath. People familiar with the situation claimed the warden did not respond immediately. Instead, he allegedly reviewed camera footage first, scanning through hours of grainy black and white video, searching for movement near Diddy's area. A shadow here, a flicker there, a figure walking past the cell bars. Nothing certain, nothing clear, but enough to make the warden lean back in his chair, exhale, and whisper, "We need to follow protocol." And protocol meant one thing: this situation was no longer a rumor. It was now an investigation. What happened next unfolded with a chilling slowness, the kind of deliberate pace that turns minutes into something heavier and harder to breathe through. Officers didn't rush. They didn't flare tempers or raise voices. Instead, they worked with a calm that felt more threatening than anger, because calm meant certainty. Calm meant procedure. Calm meant that the allegation, even if unproven, was being treated seriously enough that every corner near Diddy's living space would be examined under a microscope. Inmates watched from the doorway bars, their hands curling around the steel, their eyes darting between officers as if hoping to catch one hint of what had allegedly been found. But no officer revealed anything. They held their expressions in tight, unreadable lines, faces carved like stone. While the officers worked, Diddy stood quietly against the wall, back straight, eyes lowered. A person familiar with the situation later claimed that he looked exhausted, drained. Not from physical strain, but from the emotional weight of being dragged into yet another swirl of suspicion. The unit air was cold, colder than usual, as though even the ventilation had frozen in anticipation of what might be revealed. One officer approached him briefly, speaking in a voice barely above a rumble. "We're following procedure," he reportedly said. "Just cooperate." Diddy didn't respond. He simply nodded, jaw tight, breath shallow. The quiet compliance wasn't an admission of anything. It was the posture of someone who understood how fragile his position had become inside these walls. Meanwhile, the warden's office had shifted into a quiet storm. The blinds were partially drawn, letting thin stripes of light streak across the desk where the alleged object had reportedly been placed. Not confirmed to belong to Diddy, not proven connected to him, but its proximity alone made it dangerous. The warden reportedly leaned forward, elbows pressing into the desk as he examined the item under the faint glow of his desk lamp. A file sat open beside it, filled with notes scribbled by officers who had moved through the unit minutes earlier. Another supervisor stood nearby, arms folded, expression stiff with concern. The leak reached outside already, he allegedly said. Someone's pushing this story fast. The warden didn't look up, but his silence spoke volumes. A leak traveling outside the prison before verification meant one thing. This situation had already slipped beyond the walls. Eyes from the outside world were watching. Back in the unit, the tension was beginning to spread like wildfire. More officers arrived, their radios crackling with static, their expressions tightening as they received updates from the administrative wing. Inmates began to murmur, their voices low and sharp, as they speculated about what the officers were searching for. "It's nothing," one inmate whispered to another. "Just someone trying to stir trouble." But his partner shook his head. They wouldn't bring this many officers unless it was serious. And serious was an understatement. Every additional officer meant the situation was escalating, inch by inch, towards something larger, something heavier, something that could trigger a review, or worse, an emergency hearing. Diddy's breathing allegedly grew more rapid as he watched the officers move around him. He wasn't restrained, but the eyes on him made him feel like he was. The cold concrete beneath his shoes felt harder with each passing second, as if the floor itself was turning against him. He swallowed hard, blinking slowly, and for a brief moment, his eyes flickered upward to meet those of a nearby officer. The officer looked away immediately, not out of disrespect, but out of professional instinct. Once a situation reaches the warden's desk, no officer wants to be caught showing emotion. They become machines, precise and expressionless, moving with purpose only, according to insiders. The officers then turned their focus to the common area adjacent to Diddy's bunk. It was a wide open space with benches, metal tables bolted to the floor, and a set of storage lockers used by multiple inmates. One officer opened a locker with gloved hands, his movements silent and clinical. Another officer crouched near a floor vent, shining a flashlight inside, the beam cutting through the dust that drifted lazily in the air. A third officer examined a trash bin, lifting each piece of discarded paper with slow, methodical care. The entire scene looked less like a prison search and more like a forensic investigation. Every movement weighed and calculated. Suddenly, one officer's radio crackled with a faint, tense voice. "Warden wants a second review of the footage." The message sent a ripple through the officers. Double reviews. The hours that followed moved with a strange, unsettling rhythm inside Fort Dix, the kind of rhythm that turns ordinary moments into tense, heavy pauses where every sound feels sharper, every movement feels suspicious, and every whisper carries the weight of something far bigger than the prison walls can contain. Word of the alleged alcohol discovery had already seeped into places it was never meant to reach: the cafeteria lines, the recreation yard, the medical wing, the visiting area. Every corner of the facility was now pulsing with quiet, electrified anticipation. Inmates watched the officers with narrowed eyes, waiting for their expressions to reveal something, anything, that would confirm or debunk the leak that had taken over the compound. But the officers said nothing. They simply moved with purpose, their radios crackling with short, clipped messages that only deepened the mystery. By midday, the warden had reportedly summoned a small team to review the area once more, but this time with heightened scrutiny. According to insiders, he didn't want assumptions. He didn't want fear. He wanted clarity. He allegedly walked into the unit with a cold, unreadable expression, the kind of expression that instantly silenced the entire floor. Inmates stood upright, their hands at their sides, eyes lowered. Even the officers stiffened. Presence can be a weapon, and the warden wielded his like a silent blade. Some claim he walked straight to the spot where the questionable item had allegedly been found, crouching beside it, scanning the area with the slow, calculating gaze of someone who had seen dozens of incidents spiraling out of control, simply because people rushed to judgment. There was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation, only an eerie quiet as the warden traced his fingers along the floor, the walls, the railings, as if trying to sense whether something truly didn't belong. At one point, he paused and glanced at the corner of the unit where Diddy sat on the lower bunk, his hands resting on his knees, his face still, expression unreadable. The warden didn't say a word to him. He simply looked. And in that moment, an unspoken tension curled through the air between them, one man in power, one man under scrutiny, both aware of how a single object, a single claim, could alter everything. Meanwhile, officers outside the unit were reportedly scrambling through paperwork, checking logs from the previous night, reviewing which guards had been on duty, verifying who had passed through the hallway near the area in question. A supervisor allegedly demanded clarity on every detail: lighting conditions, inmate movements, noise levels, shift changes, radio chatter. Nothing was too small to be examined. The prison was doing what it always does when something uncertain surfaces: tighten control, flood everything with procedure, and extract answers from the smallest pieces of information. But answers, at least this time, were not coming easily. The footage from the security cameras appeared grainy in certain sections. Shadows overlapped in a way that created more confusion than clarity. At least 2 officers reportedly disagreed on what they saw. One swore a figure lingered near the lower-tier corner for longer than usual. Another insisted the figure was simply passing by. The warden allegedly replayed the clip multiple times, each run only deepening the ambiguity. If something was there, it was never held up to the camera. If someone placed something, their hands were never clearly shown. It was a puzzle missing half its pieces. For Diddy, the uncertainty was a different kind of weight. According to a source familiar with the situation, he remained silent for most of the investigation, speaking only when spoken to, answering questions calmly, carefully, aware that anything he said could be interpreted in ways he couldn't control. He reportedly told an officer that he had not seen anything unusual, had not touched anything he shouldn't, and had no knowledge of any object being near his living area. His voice was steady but strained, the kind of tone that carried both exhaustion and fear not of guilt, but of misunderstanding, of implication, of being dragged back into a whirlwind he thought had finally begun to settle. As the investigation continued, tension began spreading to the staff as well. Some officers allegedly felt frustrated that the leak had reached outside channels before they had the chance to confirm anything. Others whispered that any incident involving Diddy, even a rumor, would inevitably pull in outside attention, pressure from above, questions from reporters, scrutiny from federal departments eager to ensure no mistakes were being made. And in the middle of all this stood one tiny, unconfirmed claim that alcohol had been found near his space. By late afternoon, according to insiders, 2 federal supervisors arrived at the facility. Their presence was not common. Their vehicles rolled through the gates with tinted windows, engines humming quietly, and when they stepped onto the grounds, the officers in the yard straightened immediately. They walked with purpose, clipboards in hand, their expressions hardened by years of internal reviews. They didn't waste time on greetings or explanations. They reportedly moved straight to the unit with the kind of speed that makes inmates back away from the bars and pray they aren't about to be questioned when they entered the unit. The silence was instant. The sound of footsteps echoed sharply against the concrete floors as they approached the area under scrutiny. They reviewed the space. They asked officers pointed questions. They examined the alleged object, still stored in a sealed evidence pouch, its contents unknown, its implications enormous. One of them leaned down close to the floor, squinting, tracing a finger along the cold surface. Another allegedly took notes, nodding slowly, occasionally glancing toward Diddy, who sat rigidly on his bunk, his jaw clenched. His eyes focused on a fixed point across the room, according to a person present. One of the supervisors finally spoke after several minutes of silence. "We need to confirm whether the item was placed, dropped, or transferred," he said. "Proximity alone does not establish involvement. We need clarity." It was a small statement, but it shifted the air in the room, because it meant something crucial. The investigation wasn't assuming guilt not yet. There was room for doubt, room for interpretation, room for the possibility that the entire situation might hinge on where that object was found rather than who it belonged to. Still, the uncertainty was its own punishment. Inmates continued whispering theories. Officers continued walking the corridors with stiff postures. The warden remained in his office longer than usual, reviewing reports, making calls, ensuring that every detail was documented. No one wanted another scandal. No one wanted missteps. And no one wanted this leak to spiral into something uncontrollable. As evening approached, the lights dimmed slightly inside the unit, casting long shadows across the floor, shadows that swayed and stretched with every movement. Diddy reportedly leaned back against the wall of his bunk, breathing slowly, his mind racing with possibilities. He had survived long days inside the facility before, but this one felt different. This one felt heavier. It wasn't just what might have been found, it was what people would believe, what they would assume, what they would whisper long after the truth emerged. For now, the investigation was ongoing. The truth was still blurred. And the leak that had sparked the chaos showed no signs of fading. What unfolded next carried a strange, heavy quietness, one that felt too deliberate, too precise, too controlled to be accidental. As the hours passed, the prison seemed to fall into an unnatural silence, the kind that only appears when too many people are waiting for the same truth at the same time. Officers spoke less. Radios crackled with shorter bursts of sound. Even the inmates, usually loud by this point in the evening, kept their voices low, their conversations tight and whispered. Word had already spread through every corner of Fort. Dix set the investigation surrounding the alleged alcohol discovery near Diddy's area had escalated far beyond what anyone expected. And although no official announcement had been made, the tension lingering in the air felt as definitive as any public statement could have been, according to individuals familiar with the situation. A small internal team had been gathered in the administrative wing. Behind a locked door with frosted glass, where the warden stood at the head of a long metal table. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't pound his fist. He just stared at the documents in front of him with an expression that nobody around him could fully interpret. Some said he looked frustrated. Some said he looked confused. Some believed he looked quietly alarmed, as though the weight of what he was reading had settled deep into his shoulders. The papers allegedly detailed the findings from earlier sweeps, locations checked, objects photographed, statements taken from officers, and notes about potential camera blind spots. But the truth was still murky. Nothing in the report offered the clarity he needed. One officer cleared his throat and said softly, "Sir, this situation is becoming larger than this institution. Media monitoring teams are already flagging social chatter. The leak is spreading." The warden didn't look up. He simply exhaled slowly and said, "We can only control what we can verify." And so far, nothing is verified. Yet even as he said it, there was a heaviness in his tone, an acknowledgement that the truth inside a federal facility often becomes overshadowed by perception. And perception, once ignited, can become unstoppable. Back in the unit, Diddy sat quietly on the lower bunk, leaning back against the cold cement wall. His hands pressed together as though trying to steady the tremor running through his chest. Reports suggest he hadn't spoken much since the investigation began, not out of defiance, but out of exhaustion. As though every accusation, every claim, Every new leak had worn away another layer of energy inside him. He looked older, some inmates later said. Not in age, but in spirit. His eyes followed every movement of the officers patrolling the block, reading them, analyzing them, trying to understand what they knew that he did. Single quotes. One inmate walked past slowly and murmured under his breath. They think they found something again, but Diddy didn't respond. He simply lowered his gaze, staring at the floor as though the concrete offered more truth than the people around him. His breathing remained steady, but the tension in his jaw revealed everything: fear, frustration, disbelief, and perhaps something heavier, something resembling resignation. When accusations keep coming, even unverified ones, the weight of defending oneself can feel endless. As night settled over Fort Dix, the fluorescent lights flickered slightly, just enough to make a few inmates glance upward. The guards dimmed the common area lights, signaling the approach of lockdown. But the tension remained overwhelmingly bright, like a spotlight fixed on the entire block. Officers moved between cells more slowly now, scanning the area with a kind of cautious awareness usually reserved for emergencies. One officer paused outside Diddy's cell, studying him in silence for several seconds before moving on. It wasn't a confrontation. It wasn't an accusation. It was something more subtle in certainty. Later, according to someone who overheard the quiet exchange, two officers lingered by the unit entrance, whispering in low voices. "I don't get it," one said. "If something was really found, why hasn't the warden confirmed it?" The other shrugged. "Maybe because nothing adds up yet. Maybe because this is bigger than what's here." Their words floated down the hallway like fragments of an unfinished truth, but no one dared to ask for more. In the warden's office, the decision finally came. Not loudly, not with force, but with the same deliberate calm that had defined the day. After hours of reviewing reports, reading statements, analyzing unclear footage, and questioning the officers involved, he made a choice that would determine the tone of the next 72 hours inside Fort Dix. He pressed the intercom button and said, "Begin extended monitoring protocol." It was not a punishment. It was not an accusation. It was a precaution. But in a place like Fort Dix, a precaution can feel like a verdict. Within minutes, officers reappeared in the block, setting up additional observation points, adjusting camera angles, and documenting movements with a precision that didn't go unnoticed. Inmates murmured nervously, watching the sudden shift with widened eyes. Diddy lifted his head as the officers approached, his expression unreadable as they updated the board outside the unit. He wasn't moved. He wasn't questioned. He wasn't placed in restraints. But the message was unmistakable. The investigation wasn't going away, according to individuals aware of the protocol. Extended monitoring can last anywhere from hours to days, and its implementation means that something in the earlier findings had raised enough concern to justify deeper oversight. Not proof, not confirmation, just concern. And concern alone can alter the atmosphere of a federal facility more powerfully than any confirmed accusation. As the final lights dimmed for the night, the block settled into a tense, uneasy quiet. Some inmates lay awake, listening for the sound of officers patrolling in the dark. Others whispered theories into their pillows, speculating about what had happened near Diddy's area and what it meant for the coming days. But Diddy, according to a source familiar with the situation, remained still, staring at the faint glow from the hallway as though searching for answers in the shadows. He knew the investigation was far from over. He knew the speculation outside the prison walls had already begun. And he knew that every hour that passed without clarification would invite more rumors, more doubt, more pressure, yet beneath all of it, there was one truth he could not escape. This was not the first time a claim had altered the course of his days, and it likely would not be the last. The system around him seemed to operate on a rhythm he no longer recognized, a rhythm shaped by leaks, whispers, and unconfirmed details that could shift the ground beneath his feet at any moment. As he finally closed his eyes, the lights humming softly above him, he understood that tomorrow would not bring relief. It would bring questions. And questions inside a place like Fort Dix can be far more dangerous than answers.